What would you do if the hotel front desk called your phone at 11:47 on a Thursday night and asked, "Sir, do you want us to hold on to the lingerie your wife left behind in her room?" That's not a riddle, that was my reality. And those words spoken in a bored, professional tone by some receptionist who had no idea they'd just detonated my entire marriage burned themselves into my head. Lingerie, my wife, hotel, a sentence I couldn't make fit no matter how hard I tried. Let me rewind. Because stories like this don't explode out of nowhere, they build quietly like pressure under a lid. She had been saying for weeks that work was crazy. Late nights at the office, endless team dinners, all the usual lines you hear in those throwaway rom-coms that suddenly don't feel funny when you're living them. And I wanted to believe her. God help me, I did. Because when you love someone, you learn to bend your logic into the shapes that make their lies fit. That night started like any other. She kissed me on the cheek around 6, said she'd be home late because her team had a client presentation to finish. She wore that grey blazer she always said made her feel powerful. I told her not to worry, I'd save her some dinner. She smiled, said "You're the best," and walked out. That was supposed to be the end of it. By 10:30, I was half asleep on the couch, the TV playing some show I wasn't even following. My phone buzzed, unknown number. Normally I'd ignore it, but something made me swipe, and then came that voice. "Good evening, sir. We have an item here belonging to Mrs. Taylor, a delicate garment, lingerie. She left it in her room. Would you like us to hold it until she returns?" For a second I honestly thought it was a prank. My heart didn't even have time to race. I laughed, this nervous bark, and said, "You must have the wrong number." But then he confirmed her name, spelled it out. Mrs. Taylor, my wife, and then gave me the hotel's name. A hotel not 10 minutes from our house. I hung up. I didn't yell at him. I didn't ask questions. I just hung up, because in that moment, I wasn't ready for the truth. I wasn't ready to picture her there, in some room, leaving behind lingerie like it was a piece of forgotten luggage. I stared at the wall, for I don't know how long. The clock ticked loud, the TV sounded tinny, and my head felt like it was full of sand. Finally I stood up, grabbed my keys, drove. I told myself I wasn't going to do anything dramatic, that maybe there was some explanation, maybe it was for work, maybe someone else borrowed her name, maybe anything but the obvious. But the whole drive, my knuckles were white on the steering wheel, because deep down I knew the hotel wasn't fancy, just one of those business hotels off the highway, clean lobby, fake smiles. The receptionist looked confused when I walked in. He recognized me as the guy he'd called. His eyes flicked with awkward pity, and I hated that more than anything, being pitied by a stranger who knew more about my marriage than I did. I asked for her room number. He hesitated, then gave it to me. 308. I rode the elevator up in silence, hearing the cables groan, feeling the walls press in. When I reached the door, I didn't knock. I stood there, listening, and I swear, the sounds from inside are etched into my bones. Laughter, a man's voice, her laugh so free, so light, the kind I hadn't heard directed at me in months. I didn't go in, not then. I could have kicked down the door, confronted them, dragged the truth out right there in front of him, but I didn't. I walked away. My legs felt like cement, my chest like fire, but I turned and left. Because the worst thing wasn't that she was in there. The worst thing was realizing she hadn't even bothered to hide it anymore. That lingerie wasn't an accident. It was evidence of how careless she'd become, how little she thought of me. I drove home numb, parked the car, sat in the driveway for half an hour. The house was dark, quiet, the kind of quiet that suddenly feels sinister. When she finally walked through the door at 1:12 a.m., she had that blazer on again, hair tied back, makeup smudged just enough to pass as tired. She smiled at me, casual as anything, and said, "Sorry I'm late, long night." I looked at her, just looked, and for a moment I wondered how many times she'd walked through that door with stories that were nothing but scripts rehearsed in someone else's bed. But I didn't confront her, not yet, because you don't fight a war in the open when you've only just realized you're in one. You wait, you watch, you gather, and then you strike when they least expect it. That night, lying next to her, I felt like I was beside a stranger, her breathing steady, her hand brushing my arm like nothing had happened. I stared at the ceiling and thought about that phone call, that receptionist's voice, the lingerie, and I knew something had shifted permanently. I wasn't the husband who trusted blindly anymore. I was the man who'd been handed the truth by mistake. And once you have it, you can't unhear it, can't unsee it. The next morning she kissed me goodbye like always, coffee in one hand, keys in the other, a smile that would have melted me a year ago, but I just nodded. Because while she was living in lies, I was waking up, and I had no intention of letting her walk me into darkness again. That was the beginning of the unraveling. The moment the curtain lifted, the show ended, and I realized the woman I thought I knew was playing two roles at once. And if you think that was the breaking point, you're wrong. That was just the first crack in the dam. The flood was still coming. Part 2. The lingerie wasn't just fabric. It was the thread that began pulling everything apart, and once I had it in my hand, I couldn't stop. I didn't sleep after that night. You ever lie in bed next to someone you've loved for years, and suddenly their breathing, their warmth, even the way their hair brushes your shoulder feels foreign? That's what it was like. She was there but not there. And I knew if I let it slide, if I convinced myself it was just a mistake or work stress, I'd become the fool she already thought I was. So I did what any man with a shred of self-respect left would do. I started digging. I wasn't reckless. I didn't accuse. I didn't storm into her office or demand answers. No, I went cold, observant. I listened more than I spoke. Every late-night meeting, every sudden phone call in the other room, every new piece of lingerie she mysteriously acquired despite telling me she was saving money, I filed it away. And here's the thing about liars. They always slip. They get too comfortable. They forget that the person they're lying to isn't blind, just patient. My wife slipped fast. A receipt in her bag for champagne from the very hotel that had called me. A charge on our joint card for a restaurant she'd sworn she hated. A text notification lighting up her phone at 1 a.m. from someone named E. So I set a trap. Not dramatic, not loud, just quiet, methodical. I told her I'd be away one weekend visiting my brother. Packed a bag, kissed her goodbye, drove around the corner and parked. Then I came back after dark and waited. Sure enough, by 9 p.m. she left the house dressed like she was headed anywhere but work. I followed. Not close enough for her to notice, but close enough to see her car pull into that same hotel. Room 3 Hode again. I didn't go in, not yet. Instead, I went back home, poured myself a drink, and opened the folder I'd been building. Hotel call log, receipts, screenshots, photos. A case, neat and airtight. And for the first time since that phone call, I felt calm. Because this wasn't paranoia anymore. It wasn't suspicion. It was fact. The next morning, she waltzed in with her hair a mess, perfume clinging to her blouse, claiming she'd worked all night. I didn't flinch. I made her coffee, kissed her forehead, and said, "You should get some rest." And the way she smiled, thinking she'd fooled me, lit a fire in me. Because the sweetest revenge isn't anger. It's letting them believe they're still in control, right up until you flip the switch. That switch came 2 weeks later, at her mother's birthday dinner. Big family gathering, everyone around the table, laughter filling the air. She sat beside me, hand on my arm, playing the perfect wife, and just when she leaned over to kiss my cheek, I slipped my phone onto the table, screen up, video playing, the footage, straight from the hotel hallway camera I'd requested under the guise of a billing dispute. There she was, clear as day, walking hand in hand with E, into room 308, the lingerie bag in her other hand. The table went silent, forks stopped mid-air, her mother gasped, her father's face drained white. She froze, eyes wide, hand still on my arm like maybe she could keep the moment from unraveling if she just didn't move. But the truth was louder than anything she could say. I didn't yell, didn't gloat. I just looked at her and said, "They called me about your lingerie. That's how I found out." Then I stood up, pushed my chair back and walked out. Left her there with her family, with the truth echoing louder than any accusations ever could. The fallout was swift. Her family stopped covering for her. Friends who'd once nodded along with her cold husband story saw her differently. And her lover, E. Turns out he was married too. His wife found out, and suddenly their little fantasy world collapsed in flames. As for me, I filed for divorce, presented the evidence neatly, calmly. No drawn-out battles, no messy he said, she said. Just facts, lingerie, receipts, footage. And when it was done, I walked away with my dignity intact, while she was left clutching excuses no one wanted to hear. Now, when I think back to that late-night phone call, I almost laugh, because what she thought would be a secret rendezvous turned into her undoing, all because of one careless detail. Lingerie, forgotten in a hotel room. The smallest thing unraveling the biggest lie. And here's the truth I learned. Betrayal doesn't need you to fight it with fire. Sometimes all it needs is light. Shine it bright enough, and liars will burn themselves without you lifting a finger. So when you ask me what I did after the hotel called me about her lingerie, I'll tell you this: I stopped being blind, I stopped being passive, and I started being the man who let the truth do all the work. And believe me, the truth always works harder than revenge ever could.